Welcome to Blueberry Podcasting Podcast Mythbusters. Debunking the myth Spotify and YouTube versus RSS and podcasting. Hey everyone, Todd Cochran here. After 20 years in podcasting, I've heard every prediction in the book, including the wild claim we're tackling today. You might have heard the myth that Spotify and YouTube have replaced RSS and podcasting. Well, some folks insist RSS is old news and all you need now are those big platforms. Well, buckle up. We're about to bust that myth with some real real talk. The myth at face value. At first glance, it's easy to see why this idea caught on. Spotify has been pouring money into podcasting, even signing exclusive deals with stars like Joe Rogan for hundreds of millions of dollars. YouTube, meanwhile, is flooded with podcast videos as more shows upload their episodes there. In fact, by late 2024, YouTube had become the number one platform for podcast consumption. About 31% of weekly listens, or were they viewers, edging out Spotify at 27% and even longtime champ Apple Podcasts. Now, with stats like that, there's no wonder some assume the old school RSS feed is a relic of the past. But hold on, before we write off RSS, let's remember what RSS actually is and why it's so important. What RSS really does, and be honest with you, it can make your eyes glaze over a little bit, so let's not worry about the technical aspects. But RSS stands for really simple syndication, and it's the open backbone of podcast distribution. It's a web feed that automatically delivers new episodes to any podcast app that's subscribed. Publish a new episode, and your RSS feed alerts every platform, Apple, Overcast, Pocket Cast, you name it, that there's a brand new episode and fresh content. Think of RSS as the underground wiring connecting podcasts to all these apps. Now, Spotify and YouTube might look like the shiny new skyscrapers in Podcast City, but guess what? They're still connected to those wires. Most podcasts on Spotify are supplied via the creator's RSS feed. That happens through Blueberry. And YouTube, even YouTube has started using RSS feeds to power its podcast section. That's a little known fact to most people. In 2023, YouTube announced that podcasters could plug in their RSS feed to automatically upload episodes to their platform. Pretty ironic to embrace RSS if it were dead, right? Well, not everything is as it seems. So let's bust the myth with facts. So here's why Spotify and YouTube haven't replaced RSS. Millions of podcasts are on RSS. There are around 4 million podcasts out there with public RSS feeds. The open ecosystem is just too massive to be replaced by a single platform. Only a tiny fraction of shows are exclusive to Spotify or YouTube. The vast majority are out on an open RSS feed being delivered by all apps. Apple's and others depend on RSS. Apple Podcasts, still one of the biggest players according for roughly 1/3 of listens, is locked in and using RSS. If RSS disappears, Apple Podcast library would go dark, and so would dozens of other listening apps that rely on open feeds. No RSS means no podcast on those platforms, period. Even Spotify, again, they rely on RSS. Spotify hasn't ditched RSS. If you subscribe to a paid show on Spotify, they'll give you a private RSS link so you can listen to any app you want. They also distribute shows to Apple by RSS that they create on their creator platform. So RSS is not gone. Even inside its walled garden, Spotify uses RSS to keep podcasts accessible. It knows the open ecosystem is still crucial. In other words, even inside its walled garden, Spotify uses RSS to keep podcasts accessible. It knows the open ecosystem is still crucial. Why people believe the myth? Well, if RSS is so critical, why do people think Spotify and YouTube took over? There's a few reasons. Big platform visibility. Spotify and YouTube have huge user bases, so many newcomers first discover podcasts in those apps. They make it seem like podcast equals Spotify and YouTube, but it's so far from the truth. splashy headlines when Spotify signs big exclusives or a famous YouTuber launches a show. It grabs headlines and reinforces the idea that these platforms are podcast space or are the podcast space. Meanwhile, the quiet RSS infrastructure really isn't in the spotlight. It just keeps doing what it's doing. People stick to what's easy. If you're already on YouTube or Spotify, it's convenient to use it for podcasts. But just because it's easy doesn't mean RSS isn't working behind the scenes. It is quietly ensuring that those shows appear everywhere else as well. Distribution across 100 different platforms. RSS remains the backbone. Here's the reality. RSS still underpins everything. Even if you get your podcasts on Spotify or YouTube, those same shows are shows that are being added there, usually being delivered via RSS to their apps simultaneously. Imagine Spotify and YouTube removed all podcasts tomorrow. The podcast world would still keep spinning because RSS feeds would continue delivering episodes to all the other apps and directories. But if RSS itself vanished, then we'd have a podcast apocalypse. Most podcast apps, including much of Spotify's catalog, would suddenly have no content. That's how fundamental RSS is to the whole system. So really, the conclusion is very, very clear. Spotify and YouTube have not killed RSS. They've simply joined the party. RSS remains the road they're driving on. Spotify and YouTube might be flashy sports cars, but they're cruising on the open highway that RSS built. So next time you hear someone say RSS is outdated or podcasts are only on Spotify and YouTube, now you're going to really know the truth. Without RSS, the podcast universe as we know it would collapse. RSS isn't going anywhere. It's still quietly humming engine that lets podcasting be the open, everywhere medium that we all enjoy and will continue to enjoy for as long as we have open RSS and open podcasting. Thank you for joining me today. Again, my name is Todd Cochran. Consider that myth busted, a podcast myth buster episode. Please follow or subscribe to our Blueberry channel. If you like this, give a thumbs up. We think I'll be back next week with other news or myth busting. Until then, bye-bye.